December 7th, 1941 started out as a normal Sunday morning for the children that lived on the island of Oahu. It soon became a disaster. The attack on Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese was a turning point in history for the children that lived on Oahu. It affected their lives as they now had to live under martial law. It also affected their families and their future life. After the attack, Oahu experienced a turning point in history because it was under martial law. Martial law was when the military took over and was in charge. They were the police and everyone had to follow the laws that the military made. Everyone had to stay home unless your job was important to the war effort. Sam Keiko'oha was 5 years old and visiting family in Aiea just above Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th. He and his cousins were playing outside when they saw the smoke from Pearl Harbor. They quickly woke their parents, who turned on the radio to find that the island was under attack. Because his father worked at the state hospital, he had to go to work. As they drove him there, they were stopped by military convoys and all had to hide under the army truck for fear of another bombing. Because of all the military on the road and having to stop and hide along the way, it took their family all day to return home to Laie.
And so my father said, okay, let's just go. And so it was like about 8 o'clock in the morning. So he says, come on, get dressed on the car. And so everybody got on the car. And we started driving off. And there was a whole truck of army guys in the truck. And they looked at us and we heard a plane. He says, park the car. So my father parked the car. And they stopped the truck. And all the army guys ran underneath the truck, and we ran between the car and the hill. And so the plane came and...
Some children also had to carry around a gas mask everywhere they went. Everyone had to paint their windows black or keep all lights off at night. The military had wardens that would walk around the neighborhood to make sure everything was dark. There was a fear that enemy planes would use the lights from the houses and cars as guides to find the island and bomb it again. Joaquin Chain was a 9th grader living in Kaneohe on December 7th. He watched the Japanese planes attack the naval station near his home. His school was closed after the attack, and the military hired many boys to help fortify the beaches around the island.
This school was out for some months, and and because I was of age, they hired a lot of teenagers to go and erect barbed wire barriers along the sandy beaches, because we thought maybe they would plan a landing attack. So we with the army, we helped the army rig barbed wire barriers all along the beaches to prevent any kind of landing, and they paid us, I think, just about 25 cents an hour. We were kids, and so we worked for some months doing that. We were successful in laying barbed wire barriers all along the sandy beaches, the shorelines.
This event was a turning point in history for the families that lived on Oahu. Many of the effects on the children also affected their whole family. The children that lived on the Honolulu side of the island were let out of school for several months. Dorinda Nicholson, a small child that lived on Pearl Harbor Peninsula, said that all the schools were canceled in Honolulu. Her school was actually turned into a hospital to help care for those that were wounded in the attack.
Being under military law, the military made us have blackouts, so no lights, in case the Japanese, would come back. We carried gas masks. We had no school till February because they had to build bomb shelters. And We had no after-school activities. You couldn't leave your house after dark.
Many Japanese adults were rounded up and taken away to camps where they could be watched and kept from doing anything against the United States. Although it was never found that any Japanese on Oahu were spies or traitors. Many Japanese children remember going to a camp in central Oahu to visit their fathers who were kept there.
I come from a family of 9, including my grandpa, whom we call Ji-san, and 6 of us children. Life was quite peaceful and very quiet because this was in Haleiwa. My dad became a tailor.
We were not rich, but we were not poor. We had a good life.
World War II, that was the most traumatic event in my life. I remember seeing the newspaper which said war. I said W-A-R. It was in huge letters. I didn't know what that word was. I remember one day, I guess it did happen in April, that there were some men who came to question him.
My dad is Nisei, never been to Japan, so he wouldn't have anything Japanese in our house.
But anyway, he left with them and he never came back. We got to go and visit him at Sand Island. And I remember somebody explaining that he is not a prisoner, he is an intern. And I thought, well, what is the difference? Because, Pop isn't at home. I just wanted to see him.
All families had to deal with food rationing. People used food rationing cards and were limited on what they could buy, so they had to be careful about how much food they ate. The children on the Honolulu side of the island were more affected by the events on December 7th, 1941 than those on the countryside. Sam Kikuoha said he continued to have school and play with his Japanese neighbors who were never taken away. For the most part, life went on as normal in Laie. Even though this event took place on one Sunday morning, it also affected the future lives of many children differently. Children that grew up right in the middle of all the activity. Those that lived on the Honolulu side of the island grew up being scared and afraid of another attack. Joan Zuber Earle lived on Ford Island and watched the attack on Battleship Row. From that time on, she was afraid of loud noises. She also said that as she was growing up, she didn't like to talk about her experiences with Pearl Harbor because people just couldn't understand what she went through. She became a teacher and wrote a book about her life on Ford Island and witnessing the attack on Pearl Harbor called Children of Battleship Row. Japanese children often grew up being afraid that their parents would be taken away again. Senator Daniel Inouye said people thought that he was an enemy, but he wanted to prove them wrong. So like many other young men, he joined the army.
I was angered to realize that my government felt that I was disloyal and part of the enemy. And I wanted to be able to demonstrate, not only to my government, but to my neighbors, that I was a good American.
The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941 affected the lives of the children growing up on Oahu. All had to live with martial law, and all of them felt the effects on their families and their future. Some children felt the effects more than others, but still their lives were changed. Experts have found that one way to help children affected by war is to give them a stuffed animal that they can care for. They also suggested that parents stay close to children, answer their questions, and keep to a regular routine. It is important to learn about these events and how it affected the children because it can help us today and in the future to help children touched closely and personally by war.